It happened on one of those rainy mornings that didn't just wet the earth, it soaked into your bones. The kind of morning where the sky pressed down heavy and gray, like the world itself had taken a deep breath and forgotten how to exhale. Raindrops clung to the hospital windows, slow and silent, as if they were afraid to disturb the quiet. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead as Emily Stanton moved slowly down the corridor in her wheelchair. Her fingers rested lightly on the wheels, not pushing hard, just enough to move forward. One slow turn, one soft squeak, another echo in the hallway that had become far too familiar. She didn't look around anymore. She already knew what she'd see. Pale blue walls, faded posters of forced inspiration, and nurses who smiled a little too softly when they passed her. They meant well, but they didn't know her. 6 months ago, she wasn't just someone in a wheelchair. 6 months ago, she was Emily Stanton, the name headlined in every arts column from New York to Paris, the youngest principal ballerina in the history of the New York Academy. She danced like the world couldn't touch her, like every movement had wings. She lived for the stage lights, for the sound of applause, for the thrill of flying on her toes. People called her a prodigy, a legend in the making. And now she couldn't even feel her legs. One moment, that's all it took. A distracted driver, a slick road, a screech of tires. The kind of accident people read about in newspapers and forget by dinner. But Emily never forgot. The doctors said her spine was beyond repair, that she'd never walk again, that she should be grateful to be alive. But she didn't feel alive. Not really. Not when the night stretched long and silent, and her dreams still played in pirouettes and spotlights, only to vanish the second she opened her eyes. People called her brave, her therapists, her nurses, even strangers online who read her story, but they didn't see the truth. They didn't hear the way she cried into her pillow at night, muffling the sound so no one, especially her father, would hear. They didn't see how she stared at her reflection and barely recognized the girl looking back. It was in the emptiness, the loneliness, the silence where her future used to be.
Before the silence, there was music. Before the wheelchair, there were wings. Emily Stanton had never walked like most people. She danced. From the moment her tiny feet first touched the wooden floors of a ballet studio, she belonged to movement, to grace, to control. She was a force of beauty, light on her feet, fierce in her discipline, and untouchable on stage. She didn't just perform ballet, she became it. Her name echoed through the halls of the New York Academy like legend. Critics called her a rare comet in pointe shoes. She led their grandest performance at just 20 years old, the youngest to ever take center stage under the Academy's historic lights. She remembered the final curtain call, the roses tossed on stage, the standing ovation, her heart pounding, not from exhaustion, but from joy. That night, the world bowed to her, and she bowed back. Everything she'd worked for since she was a little girl had finally come true. And then, everything unraveled. It was raining, not heavily, just enough to make the road slick. Emily had finished rehearsal late and was on her way home. She was humming softly in the back seat of the car. Her driver chatted lightly about the upcoming season. She barely listened. She was texting her best friend a video of the encore. They were less than 4 blocks from her apartment when it happened. A distracted driver ran a red light, a van going too fast, a second too late. The world spun. Metal screamed. Glass shattered. Time stopped. Emily would later say she didn't remember the pain, only the sound, that terrible, unnatural sound of a life splitting in two. Her body was crushed against the door, her legs pinned. When they finally pulled her out, she was unconscious, bleeding, broken. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and fading flowers. Machines beeped softly. Her eyelids fluttered open to white ceilings and fluorescent lights. She tried to sit up, but couldn't. Panic flooded her like a wave. She looked down, but her legs didn't move. She tried again. Nothing. A nurse ran to call the doctor. Her father appeared at her bedside in a suit still creased from travel, his face pale, his eyes wild with fear. But no one told her what she already knew. Not at first. It wasn't until the third day, when a neurosurgeon finally came in and closed the curtain, that someone had the courage to say it. Emily, your spinal cord was severely damaged. We did everything we could, but right now, we don't expect that you'll walk again. She didn't cry. Not then. She just nodded, once, and turned her face to the wall. But the grief came later, in waves, in the silence that followed when the flowers stopped coming, when the get well texts faded, when the dancers she once called family moved on to their next big show, when the world stopped saying her name. Her father spared no expense. He brought in specialists, private nurses, hired an entire rehab team. But Emily wasn't there anymore. Not really. The accident hadn't just taken her legs, it had taken her future, her purpose, her identity. She lay still in that hospital bed for weeks, eyes open, but gone. The girl who once danced like she could fly, now couldn't feel the ground beneath her, and no one knew how to bring her back.
To the outside world, Charles Stanton had everything. He built Stanton Global from a two-room office into a multinational empire. A man of headlines and boardrooms, of fast decisions and faster wins. People whispered his name with reverence. Investors followed his every move. He wore his confidence like a tailored suit, sharp, pressed, and impenetrable. But none of that mattered. Not here. Not in this quiet hospital room where his daughter lay broken and silent. Here, Charles wasn't a CEO. He was just a father who couldn't fix what mattered most. He had always been able to fix things, contracts, markets, crises. He could make problems disappear with a phone call or a check. But when Emily's body went limp, when her legs wouldn't move, when her once fierce spirit dulled into numb silence, he realized, for the first time in his life, that power had limits. He watched her slip further away with every passing day. She didn't cry in front of him. She didn't complain. But it was worse than that. She simply stopped being, stopped speaking, stopped looking him in the eye. There were nights, after the nurses had dimmed the lights and the machines hummed softly, when Charles sat in the corner chair, his elbows on his knees, face buried in his hands. No press, no shareholders, just a man with too much money and not enough hope. He blamed himself. He should have picked her up from rehearsal. He should have made the driver wait. He should have been there. In truth, he hadn't always been the most present father. He loved Emily fiercely, but from a distance. Ballet had been her world, and work had been his. They met between meetings and performances. He thought providing everything she needed was the same as being there. But now she needed something he didn't know how to give. Not security, not comfort. She needed him. Not as a provider, but as a father who could sit with her in the dark and not try to fix it. So he tried, in the only way he knew how.
He turned one wing of his estate into a private rehabilitation center, equipped with cutting-edge machines, elite therapists, even a hydrotherapy pool flown in from Italy. He hired specialists from 5 countries, paid more than some cities' entire health budgets. Still, nothing worked. Emily rarely spoke. She refused sessions. Some days she wouldn't even leave her bed. Charles felt her slipping further away, and it terrified him. One afternoon, as he stood at her bedroom door, watching her quietly paint with her back turned, he realized something brutal. His daughter didn't need the world's best therapy. She needed to believe life was still worth living, and that was something he couldn't buy. That night, he stood alone on the mansion balcony. Rain tapped against the railing as he looked out over the city lights. It had always felt like victory, but now it just looked cold and far away. He took a slow breath, pressed a trembling hand against his heart, and made a decision. If he couldn't reach her here, he would take her somewhere quiet enough for her soul to speak again. Someplace far from money, far from titles, far from expectations. Someplace that healed not with machines, but with patience. It was his last chance. And for once, he didn't care about results. He just wanted to see his little girl smile again.
The wing Charles built for her was beautiful. Wide glass windows looked out over manicured gardens. The floors were soft, polished wood like the ballet studios she once trained in. State-of-the-art equipment lined the walls. Treadmills with harnesses, therapy pools, voice-controlled lighting. Everything anyone could ask for. But to Emily, it felt like a prison disguised as perfection. She didn't ask for any of it. She didn't want to be inspired or challenged. She didn't want to hear another motivational quote from a therapist who only saw her as a project to fix. Because deep down, she didn't believe she could be fixed. Most mornings, she didn't get out of bed. She lay curled beneath the covers, listening to the distant sounds of machines turning on, trainers prepping, voices politely waiting. Sometimes a nurse would gently knock and whisper, "Miss Stanton, are we trying today?" Emily never answered. Other times she'd drag herself into the studio in her wheelchair just to stop the staff from calling her father. But she wouldn't participate. She'd sit in the corner and stare at her reflection in the tall wall mirror, the same kind used in ballet rehearsals. Only now the girl staring back looked nothing like her. Gone was the poise, the purpose, the fire. All that remained was a shell wrapped in silence. When the therapists gently encouraged her, she nodded but didn't move. When they suggested light stretching, she pretended to consider, then wheeled herself away. She refused to speak, not out of spite, but out of exhaustion. She didn't have the energy to explain to anyone that her soul hurt more than her spine, that the ache in her chest came from mourning not just her movement, but her identity. In private, when no one was watching, her walls cracked. She'd throw pillows across the room, then cry silently as they hit the floor. She'd take her sketch pad and dig the pencil so hard into the paper it tore. Sometimes she'd whisper apologies to the girl she used to be, to the stage she left behind, to the part of her that still wanted to fight but had forgotten how. The hardest part wasn't the pain. She'd learned to live with that. The hardest part was pretending to be okay for her father, who already looked like a ghost of the man he used to be. Pretending to still be Emily Stanton, ballerina, when every day felt like a cruel reminder that she wasn't her anymore.
In that grand, custom-designed room full of machines and hope, she had never felt more alone.
Charles Stanton had built empires. He'd turned skyscrapers into landmarks, closed impossible deals, led entire industries into new eras. But standing outside his daughter's therapy wing, he felt utterly powerless. Every door he could open in the world meant nothing when the one person he loved most had locked him out. He watched from the security monitors. Day after day, Emily sat still, silent, unreachable. His daughter, the girl who once danced as if her heart had wings, was now a shadow of herself, fading more each day. And then, one sleepless night, he stumbled across an obscure article titled "Healing Storms." It wasn't flashy, no celebrity endorsements, no corporate backers, just a quiet place tucked deep in the forest where people went to remember who they were or learn how to begin again. There was no luxury, no glamour, just nature, community, and something that sounded dangerously close to hope. He read it 3 times, then once more, out loud, as if trying to convince himself it might matter. That morning, Charles made his decision. Emily didn't argue when he told her. Maybe she didn't care, or maybe, deep down, some part of her was too tired to resist anymore. She sat quietly in her chair as the housekeeper folded clothes into soft duffel bags, as the nurse prepared travel medication, as her father, still in his black suit and crisp tie, stood at the door like a man holding on to the last rope of a dream. The city faded behind them as their car crossed the bridge, the skyline swallowed in gray. Emily barely looked out the window. She didn't ask where they were going. She didn't speak at all. Hours passed. Skyscrapers gave way to winding roads. Honking horns were replaced by birdsong. The noise of New York vanished behind the hush of pine trees and distant thunderclouds. When they finally arrived, it wasn't what she expected. There were no sterile therapy rooms, no machines or mirrored walls, just a simple gravel driveway, a rustic lodge, and the sound of wind rustling through leaves. A tall wooden sign read, "Healing Storms, a place to begin again." Emily looked around, disoriented. No gates, no cameras, just quiet. As Charles stepped out of the car, he hesitated briefly, like a man unsure if he'd just made a mistake or saved a life. Emily didn't move. Not yet. But something in the air, perhaps the scent of rain or the haunting calm of the forest, felt different. Not a miracle, just the beginning of something else. Something slower, quieter, but maybe, finally, real.
The wind had just begun to soften after a stormy afternoon, and the forested paths outside Healing Storms glistened with rain. Emily was outside for the first time since arriving, a reluctant request from her caretaker. She sat alone near a wooden bench on a small stone patio at the edge of a garden. Her wheelchair faced a clearing where puddles shimmered in the fading light. The air smelled like wet pine and possibility. That's when she saw him, a little boy, no older than 6, running barefoot through the puddles. He was laughing, chasing a paper boat he had dropped. Carefree, soaked, completely alive. Emily watched, unmoving, until the boat drifted her way and stopped at her feet. The boy ran up, paused, and looked up at her. He didn't stare at her chair.
He didn't ask why she couldn't run. He just smiled, wide and toothy, and said, "That's mine, but you can keep it if you want." Emily blinked. For the first time in what felt like years, she almost smiled. It wasn't a miracle. It wasn't a cure. But it was the first moment in a long time where something inside her flickered back to life.
It was late afternoon, the kind of quiet hour when the sun poured through the trees like spilled gold. Emily had wheeled herself farther than usual, past the familiar bench, past the garden beds she usually ignored. She wasn't sure why. Maybe the boy's paper boat had cracked something open in her. And then she saw him. A man, maybe in his early 30s, kneeling in a garden bed, sleeves rolled up, hands deep in the earth. He wasn't remarkable at first glance. No grand entrance, no dramatic music, but something about him held the air still. His presence was peaceful, grounded. He didn't look at her right away. He kept working, pulling weeds, patting down soil, gently trimming wild roses with quiet care. Then, as if he sensed her watching, he glanced up. Just a moment, their eyes met across a stretch of silence. He didn't stare, didn't flinch. He simply offered a small, genuine smile before going back to his work. Emily didn't smile back, but she didn't look away either. Something about him, his stillness, his ease, the way he belonged to the moment, unnerved her and comforted her all at once. She would see him again, and though she didn't know it yet, that moment in the garden would be the beginning of something neither of them expected. The next day, the garden felt different. Emily found herself back at the same path, not because she planned it, but because something in her chest had stirred. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the boy's laughter echoing in her memory. Or maybe it was the way that man hadn't looked at her with pity. Adam was there again, quietly tending the soil. He didn't speak. He didn't intrude. He only nodded once in acknowledgement and continued with his work. That was the first thread. The second came later. A single flower, bright yellow, freshly cut, appeared on the arm of her wheelchair the next morning. No note, no explanation, but somehow she knew who had left it. She didn't throw it away. Over the next few days, there were small moments, silent exchanges. Adam would be nearby, not hovering, just present. Once, he moved a chair so she could see the lake better. Another time, he trimmed a wild path clear so her wheels wouldn't catch. He didn't speak much, but his actions filled the silence like music. Emily didn't realize she was watching him more closely now, watching how he held his son's tiny hand when they walked, how he listened when the boy talked about clouds and bugs and stories with monsters, how he knelt to the child's level when he was upset, how he held grief behind his eyes, but didn't drown in it. Adam's past came slowly into view, not through exposition, but through glimpses. A photograph slipped from his son's sketchbook, showing a woman who wasn't there anymore. A quiet moment at the edge of the garden, where he placed a rock over a flower bed like it was a gravestone. He didn't speak of it. He didn't have to. Trust wasn't built in grand gestures. It was built in the spaces between silence, in patience, in presence. And for the first time in a long time, Emily felt not alone, not healed, but not invisible either.
The wall Emily had built around herself wasn't made of brick, but silence, pain, and tightly guarded memories. And yet, slowly, under Adam's quiet presence and the unforced rhythm of retreat life, that wall began to crack.
It began with small things: a flower left gently on her tray, a book exchanged in silence, a moment of shared sunlight without words. Then one day, as she sat outside painting the sky with soft pastels, Adam quietly joined her. He didn't ask what she was painting. He just sat nearby, sketching something of his own. Their first conversation wasn't deep. He asked if she'd always loved color. She told him about dancing and how she used to feel music in her bones. He nodded, not prying, just listening. Then came laughter. Real, unexpected laughter, bubbling up when Adam teased his own failed attempt at painting a tree. Emily laughed, hand over her mouth, eyes wide with surprise, because it felt strange and beautiful to laugh again. But with laughter came something else, a crack in the armor. She looked down at her hands, the brush trembling. The tears came before she could stop them, silent, steady, as if her body remembered something her mind couldn't name. Adam didn't speak. He simply sat with her, eyes on the sky. That moment, that quiet, safe space, was the first real step toward healing.
Emily expected the usual therapy room: mats, dull colors, clinical voices. But when Adam opened the door, her breath caught. It wasn't a hospital room. It was a recreated ballet studio. The space was flooded with soft morning light pouring through high windows. Wooden floors gleamed beneath the sunlight. A long mirror lined one wall, just like the one in her childhood dance school. Classical music played faintly. Tchaikovsky, Swan Lake, its familiar strains curling through the air like an old friend. Even the scent was right: polished wood, chalky rosin, and faint lavender. Emily couldn't speak. She rolled slowly into the room, her hands trembling on the wheels. Every detail stirred something deep within her. This wasn't about fixing her legs. It was about touching the memory of who she had once been. Adam stood back, allowing the space to speak. She looked into the mirror and saw the ghost of her former self, a girl full of grace and passion. Her reflection now was different. Wounded, yes, but alive, present. The music swelled and Emily's hand lifted instinctively, as if reaching for the rhythm that still lived in her bones. She didn't dance, not with her feet, but her soul responded. That, Adam knew, was the therapy she truly needed. To remember she was still her. And that day, something shifted. Not in her body, but in her spirit. Charles Stanton stands silently at the edge of the therapy garden, watching from a distance as Emily smiles, really smiles, for the first time in months. She's in her wheelchair beneath a tree, sketching something with focused joy, while Adam sits beside her, listening quietly. For the first time, Charles sees his daughter not as broken, but as alive. The hard lines of his powerful businessman persona begin to crack. Later that evening, Charles confronts Adam inside the retreat's quiet study. The room is softly lit with books, candles, and large windows showing the darkening forest outside. Charles's voice trembles between pride, confusion, and protective love as he questions Adam's intentions. Adam doesn't flinch. With steady eyes and calm strength, he tells Charles that he doesn't see a broken girl in a chair, but a woman who still burns with life, with strength, and with something the world forgot to value: her spirit. Charles is silenced, not because he agrees yet, but because he realizes maybe he was the one who needed healing too.
The morning light streams through the retreat's wide glass windows, wrapping the therapy room in warmth. Emily, wearing soft pastel tones and her hair gently pulled back, sits silently in her wheelchair in front of the mirrored wall Adam built. Adam stands a few feet away, not instructing, just waiting. There is no pressure, only quiet faith. Emily takes a deep breath, her fingers trembling as they grip the armrests. Then slowly, deliberately, she rises to her feet,
Her legs shake, her eyes brim with tears, but she stands. Later that afternoon, with the sun setting in hues of gold and pink outside, Emily walks 5 small steps across the polished wooden floor. Each one is unsteady, but every inch is a triumph. Her smile bursts into laughter, then tears. Charles, watching from the doorway, finally breaks. He covers his face with his hand, not in shame, but in overwhelming relief. Then he steps into the room and simply says, "You did it." But Emily shakes her head gently and replies, "No, we did." In the final scene, Emily sits beside Adam on a quiet bench in the retreat's garden. She holds a small white flower he once gave her. Her head rests lightly on his shoulder. No words are spoken. They watch the sky together, full of color and movement. The world is still imperfect, but full of new beginnings. A soft narration closes. Healing isn't forgetting the fall. It's learning to rise and walk anyway.
Every week, narratives that inspire, heal, and remind us all of the important things in life. To ensure you don't miss any moments that could transform your life or your heart, subscribe to Lightstories. If you were moved by the trunk and the light, kindly like, share, and leave a comment below with what you would do for unwavering love. Thank you for viewing, and keep in mind that everyone has a backstory.